Acadêmica para alunos de pós-graduação. Todos os webinários estão disponíveis no canal do YouTube da Aucani e foram ministrados pela professora Jamila Barton, especialista em língua inglesa do Departamento de Estado dos Estados Unidos. E dentro de um programa English Language Specialist, oferecido em parceria entre a Aucani e a Embaixada e Consulado dos Estados Unidos no Brasil. Depois de 5 semanas, gostaria de agradecer não só o apoio do Regional English Language Office, nas pessoas da diretora Jennifer Uller e Marcos Irata, mas também aos professores Almor Trícoli, presidente da Aucani, e a professora Laura Izarra, diretora adjunta da Aucani e minha colega no Departamento de Letras Modernas. Passarei agora a apresentar a professora Jamila em inglês e dar início à sessão de hoje. As I have just mentioned in Portuguese, today's webinar is entitled Academic Writing Strategies for Graduate Students. This final webinar will focus on driving students to improve their writing strategies, specifically for graduate students interested in preparing for writing articles and conference proposals. We will discuss the role of genre analysis and corpus consultation in improving professional writing and learning techniques for revision and editing. I will now introduce our speaker for this series. Professor Jamila Barton has over 19 years experience in teaching English to speakers of other languages and 5 years experience with English language teacher development. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology and English from Tulane University, a CELTA RSA certificate, and an MA consult from Seattle Pacific University. She was an ESL faculty in the Seattle Colleges District for 14 years and an English language fellow at the University of Jordan and Queen Rania Teachers Academy in Amman for 2 years. Currently, she is a doctoral candidate in applied linguistics at Georgia State University, where she teaches multilingual composition, TEFL, and international teaching assistance courses. She also teaches English for art and design purposes at Savannah College of Art and Design. Her current research interests include academic literacy, data-driven learning, and English language teacher development. Before I give the floor to Professor Jamila Barton, I would like to inform the audience that if you require a certificate of attendance, a link will be available in the YouTube video description during the talk. The slides will also be made available in the video description after the talk. You can also please feel free to make questions via chat. Questions can be made in Portuguese or English, and feel free to submit them during the chat, during the webinar, and not necessarily after. So now I'm going to give the floor to Professor Jamila Barton. Thank you and welcome.
Okay, let me just get my PowerPoint ready to go here. And let me know when you can all see it here. Is it clear? Is it on? Okay, I think so, just about. Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to our last webinar in the second language writing series. Today I'd like to shift our focus from teaching writing to developing ourselves as expert academic writers in our field. Before I start, though, I'd like to point out that while I have a long career as a teaching practitioner, especially with English as a second language, I still consider myself a relatively new researcher and writer in my field. I actually started my doctoral studies about 5 years ago, and I'm currently writing my dissertation. So I've done some publishing, and I've presented actually at a number of conferences. So when we're talking about the topics today, I want you to know that many of these things we're talking about actually come from my own experience learning to write in my own field. And so I'm going to use some examples from my own writing. Okay, so as a part of graduate studies, graduate students develop appropriate literacy practices for their field. And the way that this happens is kind of outlined in the 2 quotes I have here. So the first one says, literacy practices include the tacit expectations and unwritten rules of participation, the interpersonal relationships between advisors and advisees and among peers, and the impact of enculturation or becoming cultured and interaction on student and faculty identity. And also, graduate students need to accomplish 4 distinct but interrelated tasks to develop as a professional in our field. One is intellectual mastery. The other one is learning about the realities of life as a graduate student, and then also learning about the profession and integrating oneself into the department. And so the view that I take for learning to write in my field, and this has definitely been true for me, is that literacy practices are social and interpersonal. And what we learn when we learn to write in our field is to follow community expectations and rules and to break them appropriately, right? So I'd like to start with a kind of an opening survey question here. And just as all the other webinars, you can go to pollev.com and then type in my handle, which is Jamila Barton 197, and go ahead and, for you, rank the one that is the greatest challenge as a graduate student. So thinking about your time as a graduate student, what have been your greatest challenges? So pick one of these. So for example, do you experience imposter syndrome or feeling like you don't belong? Do you experience, do you have trouble with reading and developing theoretical knowledge? Do you struggle with work-life balance? I should say work, teaching, studying, and life balance. Do you struggle with working with advisors and professors? Do you struggle with teaching? Or do you just struggle with writing for the field? So go ahead and choose your greatest challenge as a graduate student, and we'll wait for some responses. I'm not sure I see any responses just yet.
I think we're having a problem with the link. It asks people to log in. This is happening just now.
Oh, it looks like,
okay.
Okay. Maybe things are slow on my end. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people are saying imposter syndrome. For my first couple of years of graduate school, I thought, why did they let me into this school? And I'm not sure if I can handle this work, because I'd been a teacher for so long and I had never thought of myself as an academic. So I definitely relate to this issue. And then the second issue is reading and developing theoretical knowledge. I definitely agree with that. I think one of the hardest things in graduate studies is learning how to read these very difficult articles and also being able to write about them. So there's a lot of reading to write and then writing to read in graduate studies that we'll talk about today as well. Okay, all right. So, and writing for the field seems to be the top one now. Yes, I agree. Both of those things are very difficult. Okay, so let's go on. Today, we're going to talk about how we build disciplinary knowledge in our field, because this is one of the ways that we improve our writing. Then we'll discuss two rhetorical modes commonly used in graduate writing: summarizing and critiquing. And after, we'll look at 3 examples of supporting genres in graduate writing. And then finally, we'll look at some features of academic style in writing. And I don't know if we'll get to all the features, but we'll try to do as many as possible. Okay, but before we start, sorry, I went backwards. I apologize. Okay, so research into disciplinary writing and discourse communities has shown that the more familiar graduate students are with their field and the more familiar they are with the types of discourse, both written and oral, the better the more expert they seem and the more professional they seem. So a movement from sort of a beginning participation level in your field or your community of disciplinary community really starts with the amount of knowledge that you have about your discipline. So one way to improve your writing and to improve your sort of appropriateness in writing is to consciously develop and intentionally develop your disciplinary knowledge. So what do I mean by disciplinary knowledge? Well, one thing is expert members of a disciplinary community know a couple of things about the conventions in their field. For example, expert members know the people, the leading thinkers, and what they're known for. Expert members know the genres or the types of writing that are common in their field. Experts know what kind of content. So what are the theories and the research practices that are commonly used for different areas? And they also know what is common knowledge and what is like a controversial topic, and what are the opportunities for future research. So all of this is actually developed by reading. It's disciplinary knowledge really requires a lot of reading. I'm assuming that you've gained at least some information about your discipline at this point. So what were the primary ways that you gained disciplinary knowledge and knowledge of your field? And again, that includes the important people, that also includes the genres that are, or the common text types that are used in your field. And that includes content and subject matter, and also practices, right? So how did you gain this knowledge about your field? And we'll wait for some responses. Maybe it's a little bit slow.
There's a delay around 30 seconds now.
Okay, it's okay. While we're waiting for, good. Reading, yes, I agree. The number one way is reading, I agree. And reading intentionally for that purpose, talking with experts and doing research, I agree. Reading a lot, yeah. Reading widely and deeply is definitely a thing. Another thing is talking with your professors and your advisors. One of the things I did, there's a really great study by Casnave, and she was also had a similar story to me. She's one of the researchers in my field in applied linguistics. And she wrote, when she was moving, she taught for many years like me, and then went and did her doctorate. And when she was going from teaching to doctoral work, she kept a journal. And so I kept that same practice of keeping a journal. And so every time I learned something about my field, I would just jot it down in my journal. And one of the things I can do is go back and look and see how I developed that knowledge. And a lot of that comes from reading, but it also comes from talking to people in your field. For example, I learn a lot at conferences. I learn a lot from my current dissertation advisor, from other professors I've had. So these are some ways that you can develop disciplinary knowledge in your field. And I see a lot of people saying reading articles. I totally agree. So let's go on. I want to talk specifically about how we gain knowledge about genres, because that's what we'll be writing, right? So just as a reminder, so from previous webinars, we discussed the fact that genres are types of writing, and they have a social purpose. So they're a little bit different than rhetorical modes, because when we talk about genres, we mean a type of writing or a message that we use to communicate ideas for a specific reason in our fields. For example, a literature review is a genre that sometimes is a part of a research article, but sometimes is by itself, and it develops a topic in order to advance an argument, right? As a part of writing about research, or as a part of like a position paper, but it has it's a specific message used for a social purpose within the field. So when we talk about genres, that's what we mean. So one way to develop genre knowledge is as you're reading. So a lot of times we're reading for content and for our classes. You can also use your reading as an opportunity to learn about genre. So as you're reading this text that you're reading, you can ask yourself some questions and make some notes for yourself about genre specifically. So if you're reading research articles, you might ask yourself, well, what is the purpose of this article? And it's usually to present original research, right? Or in what situations would we read or write this type of this type of text, right? Who is the typical writer? Who is the typical reader of this genre? So obviously, if we're talking about research articles, we're thinking of graduate students and professors and people in academia are the writers, but also those are the readers as well. So we're often writing to our peers when we're writing research articles, but also practitioners could also be using our research. And then some other questions we might ask are, what purposes does this type of writing have, right? And how is it organized? What are the moves? Remember, we said moves are sort of, they are steps that we follow as we write. So they're kind of organizational steps. And then when you look at the moves, you can see if there are any common phrases that we use to introduce them, right? So a very common way to introduce the purpose of a research article is to say, the purpose of this paper is, right? And that's very common, and it's a perfectly fine thing for us to use, right? Good. So here's an example of a genre analysis of a cover letter. I did this actually before I wrote a cover letter for a job posting that I was going for. And so I took a number of cover letters from the internet that seemed related to my field, and I read them. And then I asked myself the questions we had before. So I thought to myself, what is the purpose of a cover letter? And I thought, well, it's to introduce yourself and tell your story. And the underlying sort of covert purpose of a cover letter is to get an interview, right? I mean, that's what we want when we do a cover letter, is to be able to talk to someone about the position. So it's a little bit high stakes, because if people don't like our cover letter, then we will not get an interview. So in what situations would we read and write one? Well, obviously when we're applying for a job or we're interested in a position. And the writer is obviously the job seeker, and the reader is the person or the hiring committee who reads it. And what I noticed, these are my sort of examples of what I noticed about cover letters. So I noticed that in the beginning of the cover letters that I saw, you kind of state the position that you want. And then it seems that you give in a second paragraph, you give the most important qualifications that relate to that position that you want. So it's not all of your qualifications, but it's targeted to the specific ones that are related to your field, or to the position. And then in the last paragraph, it seems like you specifically ask for an interview and then provide some contact information. So that's what I noticed about cover letters. And then I looked for common phrases that seemed like they were formulaic in this way. So remember, we talked during corpus consultation, the webinar, we talked about formulaic phrases and how almost 50% of the English language is formulaic, whether you're talking about oral language or written language. Well, if you can find these sort of set phrases or these language chunks, then you can use them for yourself in writing, and then you don't have to think of how to begin the sentence or how to begin the paragraph. So what I noticed is that a lot of when people were stating the position they wanted, they often said things like, I am writing because, or I am interested in, right? And when people wanted to provide contact information, they often said things like, please feel free to contact me at, right? So that's kind of what I noticed for cover letters. I would encourage you, when you are preparing to write something, whether it's a research article or a letter to a reviewer or a conference abstract or a conference proposal, that you find some examples either online or from a book, and you do this kind of genre analysis, because it will help you orient yourself to the kind of knowledge that you need in order to write. So that's a really important thing that we can do for ourselves before we begin to write at all. Okay, let's do a little question here. What genres do you use in your field? So are there specific genres that are specific to your field? For example, most academic fields and disciplines have the idea of a research article, but all of you know, I teach at a College of Art and Design in the United States, and I work with graduate students there, and I help them develop their writing. And in art and design fields, they do have this concept of the research article or the academic article, but it tends to be less rigorous than what you would see in social sciences or in the hard sciences, where you would see a great discussion of methods and results, and where in art and design you don't actually see that. It's not as much used. There's a lot more sort of conversation and elaboration in the discussion section, and less work in the methods and results sections. Okay, so a lot of people are saying academic or scientific articles. That's probably very likely. Book chapters, research papers for like classes, yeah. So actually it's interesting because research papers for classes, for graduate classes, are actually written quite differently from academic articles, in the sense that if you're writing for your professor, you're going to provide more sort of learning knowledge in the literature review. You're going to spend a lot more time showing that you know the information than you would in an academic article. So, okay, let's go on. So now I'd like to talk a little bit, now that we've talked about genre analysis and that as an important step, pre-step to writing, I'd like to actually look at some common genres for publication. Again, because this workshop is only 50 minutes, I chose to focus on shorter genres because we just don't have time to go into like a full literature review or data commentary. But if you are interested in writing sections for a research article or literature reviews or data commentaries, I have some really great books and resources at the end of the presentation that you can use. Okay, so the first genre I'd like to look at is abstracts. And abstracts are actually written for different reasons. And so they have a standard form, but they are different depending on what the reason is for writing. So you might write an abstract for a research article you plan to publish, and that has a specific form. But you also might write an abstract for your dissertation or your dissertation proposal. And that has a different form, and it's actually a little bit longer. So usually abstracts for a research article tend to be about 100 words, right? And they're very focused. Whereas a dissertation abstract tends to be longer, like 200 to 300 words. And because it has the focus on developing you as a expert in the field, there's actually quite a bit more background information. And then the other type of dissertation or the other type of abstract that you might write is for a conference. And that also has a different focus, because a conference abstract, the purpose of that kind of writing is to gain entrance into the conference, right? So it also has kind of a high stakes feeling to it, because if the reviewers on the committee don't like your abstract, then you will not get chosen for the conference. So I'd like to look at two examples. I have an example from a research article, and then my own example from a conference proposal from a couple of years ago. Okay, so let's look at the abstract for the research article and see how it's a little bit different. And I have the same questions about genre analysis on the side here, just to remind you. So while I'm reading the abstract and talking about it, you can think to yourself, what is the purpose of the genre? And in what situations would we read or write this? And who's the typical writer? Who is the typical reader of the genre? How is it organized? What are the moves? So the following abstract accompanies a research article about animation production. And the first sentence states the purpose of the research, so I'll read that. This paper examines the change in animation production over time and analyzes the different scales of internal and external linkages among production centers. So the idea here is in this first sentence, they provide you with the overall purpose of the research. So it's very short and to the point. If you look at the next sentences, 4 types of producers were identified based on their roles in animation industry, and their multi-scalar linkages were investigated for similarities and differences. So this tells you the methods of the study and the procedure for answering the research question. Several factors, including production costs, local skills, government policy, and domestic markets, were found to affect the growth of new production centers. So here, the writer presents the findings of the study, basically a big overview, and then continues to talk about the findings. Finally, in the final sentence, the governance of each animation production center was found to have evolved based on its unique development path within the industry's global value chain. This actually tells you the overall conclusion of the research article. So what you'll notice is that article abstracts actually follow the research article format. They provide but they skip the introduction, right? So they provide the purpose of the research. They then provide and sort of the methods and the procedures that were followed. They provide the findings and the results, and then they provide an overall conclusion of the research. So why do they do that? Well, because research article abstracts are often specifically for library indexes. So oftentimes journal articles are indexed in databases. And one of the things that is a requirement for the database is this sort of 100 word or less abstract that goes with the article. And it's provided as an index for when researchers and practitioners are searching. So your research article abstract has to be short, it has to be concise, it has to be to the point, and it has to give this bit of information. So the purpose, the methods and procedures, the results and the conclusions, right? And that is because readers use it to screen and preview the article. So if you're writing an article abstract for something that you want to publish, you have to think for yourself that the abstract, the people who are going to read it are going to read it to decide whether to not read the rest of your article. So you really want to provide a very good, short, concise summary so that they can find the important information and decide whether this is an article that relates to their research. So let's look at an example, my example. This is something I wrote for the TESOL conference in 2018. And that was 2 years ago. So I was accepted. So we can assume that this is a reasonably successful submission. But first, let's look at the actual writing here. And again, while I'm talking about the writing, you can think for yourself again, what is the purpose of the genre? Who will be reading it? And what determines success and non-success? What kind of information is included here? So first, if in the opening sentence here, I'm giving some background information. Now, this is actually the kind of information you would expect to see in an introduction. So if you look here, research into works and study abroad experiences for second language teachers has primarily focused on Western foreign language teachers and programs abroad and non-native speaking ESOL educator experiences and programs. So the idea here is I'm starting out a little bit broad, right? I'm starting out with an introduction. So you might wonder, that's a big difference from a research article abstract. So you might wonder, why would I focus on the background before I state the purpose? Well, because I assume when I'm applying for a conference that the reviewers on the committee who are reading it may not know anything about my topic. So if I want them to accept my topic, I have to give them a little bit more information, right? Whereas with a research article abstract, there's a sense that if someone is looking for my article, then they already have some basic background knowledge, right? So there's a couple of sentences here in the beginning that really just talk about the background to my study, right? And then at the last sentence in the first paragraph here, I explain what I actually did in my study, right? I say 20 participants from English Language Fellow Program. I collected this information from these people. I provided, I collected this kind of data, and then I found, right? So I didn't actually, conference proposal abstracts tend to be quite a little bit longer than research article abstracts. So this is actually too long for me to fit on a slide. So, but the next part here that's missing is all of my findings for my study. Okay, so what are the functions of conference abstracts? So again, the point here is to make a strong appeal and gain acceptance so that you can present at a conference, right? And so the readers are the conference review committee, and you're still giving a short summary of the topic, the methods, and the findings, but you also have to outline the topic a little bit more. So we do provide background information in our conference proposal abstracts so that the reviewers, who we assume are not experts in our particular area, maybe experts in the field, but not necessarily in our area, understand what topic we're talking about and understand how it relates to the research that we're doing. Right? And then we justify the study by saying, for example, very little research has been done in this area, and this is what we plan to do. And then we explain the methods and procedures, summarize the findings, and then highlight any important outcomes and results. And other things you could do here, depending on the conference, they will have guidelines about how long this can be. But the one, TESOL, I believe, is 200, I think it's 300 to 400 words. So I actually have quite a bit of space to talk about a lot of these things. So it depends on the conference you're going to, but you might have more room, more or less room than you would for a research article abstract. So the reason I wanted to compare these two is because I wanted to show you that the genre abstracts can be quite different depending on the purpose that you have for writing. So one of the reasons to do a genre analysis is so that you can be clear about a genre that maybe you've written before. Maybe you've written a research article abstract, but you've never written a conference proposal abstract. Well, they are a little bit different, and the reasons that you're writing are a little bit different. So it is important to kind of examine anytime you write the genre that you're writing and the purpose that you're writing for. Okay, let's go on to the next thing. So the next thing is what happens when I want to get published, right? So there's a lot of we call them occluded genres, which are genres that are not published for a wide audience, but they are things that we have to write, and they can be a little bit stressful, right? So, for example, when we get published, there's sort of a process that we follow, and I'll show that here. The process generally is that after I've written my article, I'm going to submit it to a journal, and I have to make sure that I've followed the submission guidelines. A lot of journals expect you to add a cover letter with your article that explains why you think it will be a good fit for the journal. So that cover letter is what we call an occluded genre because it's hidden. It's not something that's published later, but it is something we have to write for the editor. And the success of your cover letter, the success of your article could be due initially to how you write the cover letter, right? The manuscript submission letter, I should say. So generally, the editor is the person who reads this manuscript submission letter and reviews the article very quickly, and then they decide whether to reject the article completely or to send it for peer review and then let the reviewers review it. A desk rejection is when the editor just says this is not appropriate for our journal, or it's not has obvious problems, and they stop it there, right? So you don't want that to happen. And so your manuscript submission letter can really go a long way to help with this. And the next step, though, is that experts will review the article and give you feedback. So when the editor sends you comments with a decision letter, you'll get three choices. Either they will accept your article with minor revisions, meaning that you don't really have to do a whole lot, or they will reject your letter, which kind of stops the process, or they will ask you to revise and submit your article. And one of the things that you have to do when you revise and submit, so you have to rewrite the article, maybe add information or something like this, but also you have to address the peer reviewers' comments in writing. And this is like a response letter that you add to the article when you are giving it back for a second review, right? And this resubmission requires this response letter. And so one thing that we'll talk about today is what does that look like, right? So one of the problems with revise and submit is that you often, with journals, they'll give you multiple reviewer comments, and the reviewer comments can be conflicting. So sometimes you can have reviewers that say they really want more background information in the literature review, but another reviewer could say, this is common knowledge and you don't need to include this. So knowing how to respond to reviewers so that they will accept the second submission is a skill. Right? So we're going to talk about that. So first, I'd like to look at manuscript submission letters. So this is the letter that you send with your article to the journal as a part of the submission guidelines. And what I have here is two sort of letters. This is actually from Swales and Feek. They have a book called Navigating Academic Genres, and it's a very good book for graduate students, so I would encourage that you get it. And this is sort of letter A and letter B of the activities here. And let's see, so just take a minute to read. I'll read the first one, a little bit of the first one and a little bit of the second one. And then we'll do a poll, and you can tell me which one do you think is going to get a better response. Okay, so the first letter says, Dear Dr. So-and-so, let me introduce myself. And then they introduce themselves. And I would like to, I've written several articles. I'd like to contribute this paper to your journal. I hope you will be able to include it in the forthcoming issue. Please make any corrections you think are necessary. Okay, so this is the first letter. The second one says, Dear Dr. So-and-so, I would like to submit to your journal for possible publication, the paper. The specific subject of this paper has not been submitted for publication elsewhere. It's based on this research. I look forward to hearing from you in due course. Okay, so there are the letters there, and I'd like to know which of these do you think would get the best response from an editor? So go ahead and people say B, okay. Let's see if there's anybody else here. We already have a couple of responses. Nobody says A, huh? Okay, that's interesting. So definitely B is more to the point. It's not bragging. So sometimes when we seem like we are very knowledgeable, that might set the wrong tone with the editor. One thing that I think a lot of graduate students worry about is when you're a newcomer to a field, when you first try to publish in a journal, it can be really difficult because they don't know who you are and they may not be willing to take a chance on a new researcher as much as they would take a chance on somebody who's already known in the field. Yeah. So the first one may get a better response because this person is addressing the editor in a way that it makes clear who this person is and what they know how to do. And then the second one probably is a little bit more targeted. So they say what the topic is. They make the subject of the letter more about the article than they do about themselves. And I think probably the second letter is the better way to go. Good. And I think all of you agree with me too. So that's good. Let's go on. So let's go to the next part, which is what do we do when we receive a revise and submit letter, and then we have to respond to the reviewers and the editors after we've made changes, right? So here's also from Swales and Feek, page 68. The authors, so what they do is they give you a reviewer's comment, and then there are three options for responding to that comment. So we're going to respond in a minute and talk about which one we like the best. So the question then is, which response do you think would be preferred by the editors and the peer reviewers? Okay, so the reviewer's comment was, the authors state that it is neither practical nor economically justified to recommend, I'm not sure what that is, for all candidates for surgery. This may be the author's belief, but many surgeons do find it practical and justified to perform this type of surgery for all lung cancer patients. So, it sounds like the reviewer feels this is a belief that is not shared by the community. So how would you address this? So one way that you can address this is by saying, we've rewritten as follows, right? So you provide a rewriting and you tell them how you've rewritten it, okay? Or let's say you disagree. Reviewer 2 objected to our statement about the justifiableness of this routine, and this is our response, which is that the procedure remains a point of controversy within this type of surgery, and we've qualified our stance by saying X, right? So here, this writer feels that they need to qualify something, but that they still stand by what they originally said. And then in the last one here, an all too typical response from the American surgical establishment, focused as it is both on maximizing profits and reducing the chances of expensive malpractice lawsuits. So in international terms, we stick to our original position. So which do you think is preferred by the reviewers and the editors? So I'm going to go over here to our poll, and you can say which one you think is preferred. So in the first one, you just make the change according to what the reviewers and the editors want. In B, the writer makes a change, but in line with their own position. And then in C, the writer disagrees completely with the reviewer and the editors. So which do you think is a more appropriate response for this revise and submit response here? Okay, so some people are saying we should just fix what the reviewer and the editor want. Okay, anything else? See what other people think here. Some people are saying it's okay to change things, but not change your position, but change something to qualify. So you're still addressing the reviewer's comment, but you're not changing your complete idea, right? Nobody thinks C is okay. I agree with that. I also think that C is a little bit rude, right? So I think A and B are good, depending on what you want to do. So I have, when I've responded to reviewers, sometimes I agree with the reviewer. It's an oversight on my part. I didn't think enough about it, and I will just make the correction. So in that case, I just tell them what I rewrote it as. And one problem with A is that it doesn't explain why, and sometimes reviewers like to see why you're making a change. So B, on the other hand, I have also in writing responded to reviewers because I've disagreed with them, and I've had a slightly different position on what they're saying. So the way I do that is I explain my position, and then I show how I have changed it or qualified it to respect what the reviewer is saying. So in B, you can keep your position. You just have to make it address the reviewer's comment in some other way. So for a new researcher, that's kind of risky. B is risky because because they don't know you as well, they may want more of a revision. But I do think if you really feel strongly about something in your paper and your reviewer is asking you to change it, you can push back, and you should, right? Because part of the reason why we write research articles in the first place is to develop new knowledge. So if you have someone telling you not to change telling you to change something, then you're changing what is new and unique maybe about your paper. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. We have a little bit of time left, so I would like to talk about some writing strategies that you're going to use over and over again in all types of genres in your writing. So these are graduate writing strategies, and these are more in line with what we talked about with rhetorical modes in previous webinars. Again, while a genre is a specific type of writing with a social purpose, a rhetorical mode is a pattern that we use in writing in a number of genres. So it's helpful to study and look at commonly used patterns because it makes us stronger writers. So if I know that, if I know how to summarize, which is one of the ones we'll talk about, then I can summarize in an annotated bibliography. I can summarize in a literature review. So I can apply this mode of writing or pattern of writing to many other genres. Okay, so before we get started with talking about genres, I thought we could do a little, oh, that's not the right thing. Sorry. Went a little fast here. Do a little discussion of citation managers. So we're going to talk about summary writing. So before you can summarize, you need to be able to manage the information that you're reading. And one of the ways to do that is what we call a citation manager. So for example, in my dissertation, I currently have, I think, 470 sources because I've been reading for 2 years, right? I'm not using all of that in my dissertation, but I did read those things, and I could not possibly remember all of that information unless I have use of some sort of database or software to help me remember all of that. So I really encourage you, if you don't currently use a citation manager, it is very helpful for you to collect research articles and books and book chapters. Read those things because you can read directly in your citation manager and make highlights. Also, it helps you organize things by topic. If in my citation manager that I currently use, I have all of my things that I've read in folders based on topic. So if I want to write something like a quick literature review or a quick position paper, I can go to that folder and just use those sources on that topic. It also helps you sort and manage your sources for research. So one of the features of the Citation Manager is that it will allow you to put summaries in notes inside each source. So you can keep the PDF of the source and the actual summary that you write of that source in the same place with the citation, and then you can move it around as you need to depending on what literature review or thing that you're writing, right? So here, so again, I have all of these features here that citation managers can do. There is a free one that I think USP recommends, which is Zotero. Zotero is completely free, and you can download it to your computer. And it also has an online feature to it where you can use it online and share it with other people. It also has a browser edition to the Chrome browser, where you can have it on your Chrome browser. And so when you're researching, you can download it directly to Zotero. So, and the other thing it will do is while you write, it's called Cite While You Write, and it will actually create in-text citations and reference pages for you as you write in Microsoft Word. So it can be incredibly useful for you. Oopsie, I think I went too fast here. Sorry about that. It can be an incredibly useful thing for you to do when you're using, when you're trying to manage the amount of sources that you're reading. So this is an example. This is actually what it looks like when you open it. On the left, you have the organized sources in folders. So those are the folder topics. And then in this particular topic, colonial medicine, you have all of your sources there listed in the middle. You can click on any source and you can look at the reference information. You can click on notes and create a summary. You can click on tags and create topics for yourself so that you can search by topic. So this can be very useful. So let's do a quick poll. Do you use the citation manager? So some other ones that are, you have to pay for, like EndNote or Mendeley, are also very functional and very easy to use. And if you do use a citation manager, how do you use it, right? Do you use it when you're researching? Do you use it when you're citing sources and writing in Microsoft Word? Do you use it to create notes or summaries or organize? So I see some people are using Mendeley, or one person is using Mendeley. See if we get some other responses here. So there's lots of things you can do with citation managers, but it is, so this person says they save the reference in one document and then review it when making the reference section of the article. I'm not sure what LaTeX is. So some people haven't been using it, but think that they would like to try this. So if you are ever planning on writing a research article that has more than 10 to 20 sources, you really are going to need something that can collect your information over time. So one thing is, as an academic, you are building a body of knowledge for yourself. And so it's really helpful for you if you have sort of an organized way of building that knowledge so that later, when you're finished with the first assignment, you can use things from the second assignment. Yeah? Okay, good. So just to give you some ideas, and we'll go on and talk about summary writing. So some of the reasons that we summarize in graduate writing is because we might want to add notes to our actual sources in our citation managers, and that's an informal use. So if we have sort of an informal use here, we might just add notes in our citation manager. This would also be summary writing, but sometimes in our classes, professors might ask us to formally write an annotated bibliography. So for example, when I was preparing for my doctoral exams, my advisor and my committee wanted me to put together an annotated bibliography before I could write my exams. So that had to be very formal and very professional looking. So I ended up having to write summary annotations for each of the articles that I read for each topic, right? Another reason to write summaries is for publishing. So a lot of times we use very, very short 1 or 2 sentence summaries in position papers and literature reviews when we're comparing with other sources. So it's a really important skill, and we use summary writing both for informal sort of writing to read kind of activities like pre-writing activities, and we also use summary writing for very formal reasons in literature reviews and position papers. So I can't stress how important this particular type of writing is for all types of writing in graduate work. So the reason we write a summary is to objectively and accurately represent the author's ideas in a text. So in formal situations, when we can accurately represent the author's ideas in a text, it it helps us sound more neutral and less biased when we present our own ideas, right? We sound more credible as well. We sound more believable when we can explain what other people think about a topic. So this way we increase our credibility, and we also provide some sense of like an academic or neutral position around writing. And generally when we make a summary, we introduce the text, right? So we tend to do this kind of in-text or within sentence citation where we present the source, right? So we'll say something about the author, something about the title, something about the year. If you're doing something like in more social sciences and sciences, the year becomes important. But if you're citing from MLA or something else, you might not need to put the year. And then we offer like a 1 or 2 sentence idea about what is the main idea, what is the purpose for writing, who is the audience, right? That kind of thing. Another thing we do in summary writing is we elaborate or define specific definitions, and we explain how those terms relate to the author's ideas. So this is for every idea you would do this. You would explain the terms that the author is using and then explain how those terms relate to the author's ideas. And then you might, with your own examples, extend the ideas of the author, but that tends to be a little bit more optional from the summaries I've seen. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of a summary I wrote. This is, you can look up at the top here to see where the article actually came from. This is called The Burnout Spiral, and it's about emotion labor. And you'll see in this summary here what I mean by emotion labor. So here in the introduction, when I'm introducing the text, I say, in the article, so now you know it's an article, The Burnout Spiral, the title, Atchison et al., which is obviously this has many authors, so et al. Means and everyone else. And then it's written in 2016. And then I give you a basic main idea and purpose of the article, which is to interview 5 foreign language teachers, all women at a rural school in Georgia, and determine the extent to which their jobs entail emotional labor and how these responsibilities affect them. So this is the purpose of the article. Then I define the terms the author uses. So obviously somebody reading this summary might not know what emotional labor is, so I define it. Emotion labor, as defined by Atchison et al., is the effort service workers take to manage their own feelings and expressions when working with customers and clients. And then I explain the author's ideas. They contend that emotion labor may contribute to foreign language teacher burnout and attrition. Right? And then I extend the author's ideas or provide the final conclusion of the author, which is that these authors suggest that community attitudes and resistance might lead to higher teacher burnout and possible attrition. So this summary is something I could include as a very short sort of reminder for myself in my citation manager. And then when I am wanting to use that source and I want to remind myself what the main ideas are, I can look at the notes instead of having to completely reread the article. So that's something that can save you a lot of time. So let's look at some of the language features of summary writing. So first, for citation purposes, we need to present the source in writing. So we have what's called a within sentence citation, where we at least say, and it's different for different documentation styles. My style is APA, so I'm going to mainly be telling you APA. But for MLA, you wouldn't need to include the year, for example. But in general, you need to present the author's name, and the title, right? And some kind of information about what type of text it is. And it depends on your citation style. So you should become familiar with the citation styles of your field. So here are some examples of how I do that here. And then afterwards, in the rest of the summary, you need to continue to refer to the source in writing so that it's clear that it's not your idea, but the author's idea. So when we don't do these kind of reporting phrases, it actually sounds like our idea and we set ourselves up for plagiarism. Yeah. So just to be clear about that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about tense in reporting others' ideas. So actually, the way that we use verb tense in academic writing when we are reporting actually has different meanings than what we do in our oral language. So generally, when we use simple present tense when we are reporting others' ideas, we're really saying what we think is already known, and we're giving conclusions. Also, sometimes we use it to give evidence from previous studies without really mentioning the researcher. So we can use present tense as it's like a parenthetical citation where we provide the parentheses around the source instead of including it in the sentence. We also use it in humanities and arts to discuss a work of art, music, or literature. This idea where if it's a work of art or music or literature, we think it's sort of timeless, right? Historical present. So we don't refer to it in the past because it's not done. We think of it as timeless, right? Another sort of purpose of present tense in reporting is this idea of agreement, right? So when we report something in present tense, it sounds like we agree, right? This is a finer thing that we do. However, when we use past tense, we have other meanings for that. So a lot of times past tense is mostly intuitive in the sense that we think that when we're mentioning the researcher within a sentence, we often use past tense, right? When we are talking about the methods and the data in a research article, we would use past tense and sometimes passive. When we have some kind of past time marker, we would use past tense. And then also an interesting thing that we do is a lot of times when we are reporting, we might use past tense to set up a disagreement about something. So I might say, Barton found this information. However, recent studies suggest, right? So this, a lot of times we use past tense to indicate that we're going to disagree with what we are reporting, okay? And then the final tense that we use a lot in reporting others' ideas is present perfect. And present perfect generally introduces a new topic or summarizes previous research. Yes? So this is the primary reason we use present perfect in academic writing for reporting others' words, is to introduce a new topic or give kind of a historical overview or summarize previous research. Okay, so let's go on. I'm going to skip this part because we're running out of time. Oh, sorry. I was going to do a little bit of a competition. So tenses for reporting. What do you remember? We have two questions here, right? The first question is, what tense would be best to use for summarizing previous research? So go ahead and pick your option here.
We're having a great...
That's okay. It's giving time anyway. So, okay, let's see what we have here. We have a couple of people who all says, so for summarizing previous research, actually, it would be better to do present perfect, right? So past tense tends to do more like sort of disagreement or when we're mentioning methods or mentioning the researcher. Yeah? Okay, next question. We only have two of these. Hold on. What tense would be best to use for suggesting disagreement? I kind of give you the answer here. So go ahead and see what you think here. So this is the tense that we use to sort of set up the fact that we disagree with the author, and we're going to explain why we disagree in the next thing. Okay, so let's see what we got. So everybody said past tense. Good. I'm so glad we got that one. Okay, good. So you can see if this is true in your own field, but the research I'm referring to with verb tenses actually comes from a pretty established research using corpus research into these kinds of things. So, sorry. Okay, so let's talk about critiquing. That's probably the last thing we'll talk about today. And critiquing is another type of writing about sources, but it's specifically about critical discussion. And we often use this in the same places that we do summary writing. We use it in annotated bibliographies, we use it in literature reviews and in position papers. But mainly the purpose here is to discuss the limitations of the author's ideas in a text. So we have a very specific way that we do this because when we're talking about limitations, and if we're planning on publishing any kind of critique in a document like a literature review or a bibliography or a position paper, we have to be very careful because we don't want the author to feel offended by the way that we have critiqued them in writing. So we do this in a very set way. We say we first acknowledge the author's viewpoint, and then we concede that something is okay in that viewpoint. And then we state our view, which is generally that we disagree about something. And then we give reasons and evidence. So I'll show you an example of that. This is an example of something I wrote a while ago, which is, so here we go, acknowledging the author's viewpoint. So the first thing is, I say, the author argues that argued, because past tense, I'm going to disagree, that homeschooling has a negative consequence for children and society as a whole, right? So this idea, past tense, because I'm going to disagree. And then I want to concede that the author is not completely wrong. So I say, it's true that many studies have reported that homeschooling has negative effects, right? Now I'm going to state my own view, which is in opposition of the author. However, such reports are inadequate. And then I'm going to give reasons and evidence for thinking so, because they do not consider the increasing problems of peer pressure and violence experienced by children in the United States public school systems. And then to explain, and then I would provide more evidence and more reasons. Yes? So, this is kind of what's expected when you do critiquing writing. One of the reasons why we follow this format, if you follow it, is because when we acknowledge the author's viewpoint, we are basically providing a basic understanding of what the author says, and then we're conceding that at least some of what they say is true. And then we can present our sort of negative critique, okay? So here are some common critiquing practices that we do. We often critique strengths and praise before we talk about negatives. We often are very soft when making negative criticism. So we use hedging structures to qualify our claims very carefully. We also use positioning. So in my opinion, I think that, to state our views and express our opinions. And we also use boosting to emphasize and show confidence in claims. So when we emphasize and show confidence in claims, we might emphasize important opinions and positions from other people and other schools of thoughts. Okay, so this is some language that we use in hedging and boosting. So hedging, we might say, we might use a lot of modals like may and might. So this might be the case. We might use adjectives like it's possible that, or it's unlikely that. We might use adverbs like, perhaps or presumably, right? And if we want to make a stronger claim, we would use modals like must or have to. And then we also might use adjectives like it's certain that, or it's likely that, or of course, right? And a lot of times when we boost, we're not boosting our own claims, but we will position ourselves with other researchers and other schools of thought, and these will be boosted, right? Good. So let's look at some other, I always go too fast. So let's look at some other examples. So language for critiquing. So using modals, verbs, and evaluative adjectives. So here's an example sentence. He seems to imply that people are less likely to call the police in poorer neighborhoods. So I use seems to imply, which hedges and softens the claim. Less likely is softer than saying are unlikely, right? I also can use hypotheticals. So this is where I present this is a very indirect way of criticizing. I present a condition and then a result. But the meaning here is what I'm actually blaming or criticizing, right? So the results might have been more reliable if the researchers had checked the findings with the participants, right? And then I can also use comparatives and equatives to hedge as well. Heart disease is less frequent for those who engage in regular exercise, as opposed to heart disease is infrequent, right? Infrequent leaves no room for doubt. Less frequent leaves some room for doubt. However, some feel that customer service is not as essential for some careers. So not as essential, it leaves some room for doubt here. Okay, let's try a little activity here. What do you think? Which modal would be best for hedging your claims? So would it be, so the reason I ask this question is because would like and would actually have different meanings. So would like is expressing a preference, which actually is a little bit, it's not particularly hedged, right? It's not softened in any way. But would, as the past of will, is actually used kind of as a hedging structure. So actually C is the correct answer here. And that is all the time we have. So I'm going to kind of skip through some of this stuff. And when you are, so I had a number of things that I wanted to talk about, but can't because we're out of time, around academic styles. So when Aucani posts these slides, you'll be able to see some of the other information that we have about language that we use for academic styles. Okay, so here are some useful references. These are the references I used. In particular, if you're a graduate student and you were going to buy something as a book for yourself, I would highly recommend the English for or the English in the research world, Swale's books, which are academic writing for graduate students, abstracts and the writing of abstracts, and navigating academia, writing supporting genres. So all three of these books are really great. And then they also have one on writing literature reviews. So I would really recommend those books in particular. Also, USP has a number of graduate student resources that you should know about. So that is something that you can check out for yourself. I think there's a couple of courses that you can take, and there is, workshops and things like that you can do, tutoring and conferencing. Yeah. Okay. So here's the webinar evaluation. Please go ahead and complete it. And I guess we have a couple of minutes for questions. Maybe we can take one or two. Luciana, I think we're almost out of time, right?
Well, you're actually on the dot. I think we have 5 minutes for questions and answers and closing remarks. So okay, maybe I'll make 2 questions in a row, and then you can answer them as you wish. What do you think?
Yeah, that's totally fine. And obviously this is a topic near and dear to my heart, so I have lots to say about it. So go ahead and ask me.
I bet the audience also has many other questions, because we have been receiving many positive comments. People are thanking you very much for sharing your knowledge with them. And the public is very, very interested in academic writing. And it's a major concern for students and researchers everywhere in the world, right? So thank you so much for this series of 5 webinars. We've been together for 5 Fridays in a row, and many people have been coming the 5 Fridays. So that's very nice as well. So the questions are, how would you address cultural differences in argument presentation? Do you find that your non-native English language speaking students present arguments differently?
Yes. So that's part of the reason why I think it's okay. So I want to be clear. I don't think that we need to completely remake the non-native speaker in English. I mean, I think it's okay to write with an accent, and I think it's okay to, prefer different styles that are a little bit different than what's expected in sort of English language culture, right, or Western culture. So one of the things I noticed, I have a lot of Asian students that I work with for graduate writing, and a lot of them are very uncomfortable with having strong critique, with doing strong critiques. So what I tell them is that it's really, I'm saying negative critique because that's what it's called in the literature, but it doesn't have to be negative. Like, you can ask a question, you can make a comment. So there's a load of choices in the way that we frame what we're saying. As long as you're within the target, I think it's okay. And I think a lot of my students will write critiques that are a lot softer than what I would write them as. They do a lot more hedging structures than I would use, but it's clear what they mean. And because they know how to hedge, because they've been taking my class, then they are much more able to navigate what they want to say in a genre that, or in a mode of writing that may be uncomfortable for them.
Mm-hmm. Right, perfect. I'm glad you said about the native speaker paradigm. Obviously, it's very elucidative. We don't want to repeat. We don't want to sound native, right? We have our own voices and ways of expressing it, very, very, and could be very effective. And, another question, the last one, is about the kind of training and support. What kind of training and support do students in U.S. universities usually have in terms of academic writing? And does faculty enjoy any kind of support in academic writing in their own language?
So I'll tell you, there's a really great book. It's called Literacy Practices in Graduate School. I think I have it in the list. And one of the things that they did in that book is they talked about research that, in graduate schools in the United States, there's a 50% attrition rate, which means that 1 out of 2 students in graduate school drop out. And a lot of the reason is around writing and literacy practices. So one of the things in the last 10 years or so, universities have been trying to do is improve their help and support for graduate student writing. So some things that universities do here, they have a specific graduate writing center that is separate from the university or the undergraduate writing center. Another thing they do is they offer writing sit-ins, kind of like, so every semester I go and I bring whatever I'm working on, whatever article I'm working on, or my dissertation, and they basically provide lunch and breakfast, and you write for the entire day all together. And that really helps because there's time during the lunch and the breakfast, they give you little tips, and then you can also check in with the people that are there around your writing and talk about what you're working on. So it's very supportive in that way. And I think also there's a number of courses that we offer mainly for non-native speakers. Unfortunately, they do not offer these classes for native speakers. I could have used that class. I mean, it took me my journey from going from being a teaching practitioner to a researcher and writer was pretty rough because I wasn't used to writing this way. So, yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the answers. Thank you for another amazing webinar. I would like now to give the floor to Professor Laura Izaha for her final remarks. And also, I will close by saying thank you giving thanks to the audience. So, Professor Laura, please.
Thank you. Well, it's the end. It's a pity, but I hope that we could continue having these kinds of webinars with Jamila and with the support of the United States Department. But first of all, I would like to say thank you to the whole audience throughout all these 5 seminars and webinars, we would say. We had an average of attendance very high, as you have seen in the YouTube, and I think that there are different numbers depending on the webinar, but thank you a lot, Jamila, for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and sharing all these tools that are so important for all of us, even teachers and students and people from different areas of research that need to use academic English. And I think that all the seminars have been very enlightening and that achieve the aim of each one depending on the public, because each webinar has a spirit of its own that fulfills our needs. I would like to thank also on behalf of Aucani and of our president, Professor Valmore, who was today, he had another meeting, but just to thank also to Professor Luciana Carvalho Fonseca, my colleague, who has worked very hard together with Jamila to make this course, this cycle, a whole unit in order to achieve all our expectations. Of course, that these webinars were not possible if the Embassy of the United States, Jennifer Uller, and the Consul General, the Consulate General of the United States, also with Marcos Irata, that brought to us this possibility through the program of a specialist having with us a virtual specialist, but also present in our screen. And then I would like to just to express our desire to continue working together, to strengthening links with universities in the United States, and to have these possibilities of, this is a kind of virtual mobility of staff and students. And of course, that this would be fantastic when we could combine both things together, and having you, Jamila, with us here in Brazil too. Thanks a lot to everybody, and mainly to our team of Aucani Idiomas, Sandra Naleto and Julia Sardini, and also with the support of Paloma Moreira Freire from the academic reception, and then from the international communications of Aucani, John Carvalho, Paulo Jordão, and Vitor Martins Oliveira, who was also our graphic designer. So thanks a lot to everybody. And again, I hope that we could continue having the audience with us throughout the different courses that Aucani offers, and also with your comments. And that would be really very important for us to plan for future webinars and things that we can do together. So that's all. Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot, Luciana and Jamila, for offering us this important cycle of webinars.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Aucani, for hosting us. And Jamila, special thanks to you. Without you, this would not have been a success. It was. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, I really enjoyed being with all of you. This has been really fun and exciting for me too.
Okay, so bye-bye then. See you in the workshop in a couple of minutes.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Good work. Bye.